I found that really curious as Amy and I were talking, the receptionist or the administrative assistant. She told me about something that her mother called a good health remedy, especially for the spring of the year. Her grandmother was a native of Sneeville and half Cherokee and loved the land and lived on the land. And she swore by a tonic that she called spring tonic that she would gather every new season. This is what Amy said to me verbatim, and I share it with you. Every spring, my grandmother and my mother would go out hunting for the first fresh greens that were available. This was before the modern convenience of grocery stores and winter-grown produce. The greens they used included dandelion, burdock. Is that plantain? What is that? What is that, Bonnie? It's a weed, says this one knows. It's a weed. The function was to purify the blood. She says, I suppose this tradition came back because of having to go without fresh vegetables during the winter. And if you think about it, it makes good sense to start looking for nutrient-rich plants as soon as they become available in the spring. And if you think about it, there we go, the same sentence. After all, during winter, their staple foods were potatoes and beans and bread, not a whole lot of vitamins and minerals. She called the salad and tea she made from it spring tonic. And she maintained that it was good for the brain and the kidneys and everything in between. Now, I'll have to say, when she started talking to me about tonics, my mind kind of turned up to the fictional Walton Mountain. You remember? You remember those rich Southern Belle Baldwin sisters, Mamie and Emily, who lived on that mountain? And if you'll remember, they felt some dutiful responsibility to carry on their father's legacy of making and distributing a fine elixir, a whiskey, which they referred to affectionately as what? The recipe. And they consumed probably more of it than they distributed, so it was said. Everyone on Walton Mountain knew about their cure-all corn in a jar. They just didn't think everybody knew about it because they kept quiet. We are in the wake of, or in the shadow of, a medical and a pharmaceutical community. And offered in these 5 verses, I appreciated one commentator's tonic for pain. In this community, we know about remedies and medicinal cures, and we celebrate those who graduate with this sense of understanding of how to dispense remedies and how to dispense medicines that we might know a more healthy and lively life. In a moment of inspiration, I came up with a sermon title, The Pharmacology of Hope. You might say, boy, that's a nickel word. You know the differences between them, I suppose. Pharmacy, of course, is the study of safe and effective use of medicines, a medical science. But pharmacology, on the other hand, deals with how drugs interact with the body, the biological systems to affect the function of the body. It is the study of drugs. It is the body's reaction to drugs. It is the source of drugs that we're studying in pharmacology, the nature, the property of the drugs. As that relates to today's passage, Paul talks to the Jews who were working hard to rebuild their faith in Rome. The Emperor Claudius had expelled them from Rome, and they were just beginning to come back to their churches that were now filled with Gentiles, and they were having to try to find a way to blend their faith. And in the midst of it, Paul writes to this church at Rome, which he never visited. Suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and the character that's being formed in you will give you hope. A pharmacology or a formula for hope might ask these questions. Can hope be affected by a drug? If it is, or it can be, then what is the drug? And how does the body react to that drug? And what is the source and the nature and the property of that drug? It's not that we don't have other scriptural references to pain besides just this one that Paul gives us. You remember the rich history of lives of faith in Scripture that have emboldened us. Did we forget the children of Israel and how they wandered in the wilderness for some 40 years? I can't even remember how short the journey should have been. But God was forming those people, and it took 40 years and for some of them to die out for Him to do it. And then we remember in the beloved book of Ruth in the time of the judges that one man, Elimelech, took his wife Naomi and his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, to Moab to get away from the famine in Bethlehem. And while they were there, Naomi had the misfortune of losing both her husband Elimelech and her 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, who were the grooms of her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. When Naomi returned to her hometown, she told her kinsfolk, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for I am bitter." We remember the blameless and the upright Job, who was given over to Satan as God and Satan had a duel over if he would be good just for the sake of being good. And in the midst of that, Satan took away from him all of his property, his livestock, struck dead his 7 sons and his 3 daughters. We remember Mary, who had to give up her God-given Son, the divine Son of God, give him up on a cross. And we think about all the thousands through the centuries who have given up their lives or had their lives taken away in the reason of standing for their faith. All of these endured to the end, and whether they received a reward in this life or the next, they maintained their hope. As much as it is our nature to avoid pain, in the spirit of Paul and in the witness of many other biblical giants of faith, I believe that sometimes we may wish pain away too quickly before we have had the chance to suck the marrow out of the bone of it, to tease out of that pain that we are in the midst of some higher meaning. Not that God gave it to us, but that it happened for whatever reason it happened. And what is there that we can learn from that? And how is it that we grow from that? And that our character is formed and a sense of hope can emerge?